missing, but we will start with our karakia. Again, welcome all, and we have two apologies today from the Mayor and Deputy Mayor. John and Kevin are not here, so would someone like to move those apologies be received? Move Councillor Greenslade, seconded Councillor Metanui. Okay, the first item on the agenda is, are there any conflicts of interest to do? Is that echoing a bit? Any conflicts of interest to do with today's agenda? If not, we'll move on to the last meeting, which was the 9th of April, and confirm the minutes of the meeting. Are there any matters of clarification to do with those minutes that anyone has noticed or wishes to raise? If not, would someone like to move them as a true and correct record? Moved Councillor Campbell and second Councillor Cameron. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, there's no public forum that I know of or has been registered with me. So we'll move to the next item on the agenda. Sorry, let my computer catch up. Which is a notice of motion. So process being, and I've caught up with some of the correspondence yesterday, so it has been moved and seconded as you have received the written version there, and so it's really the points being A, B and C being the notice of motion. So Councillor Campbell has, the process is that the mover has 5 minutes to present or speak to the motion. The seconder also has 5 minutes if required. The important thing to bring up is the process is that there's once it's moved and seconded, so we can while it's been done prior to the meeting, I'll accept that it's been done in the meeting. There is no further amendments can be made to the notice of motion. If you wish to amend it, I'll give you the opportunity now before you speak to it. But once you accept that it's been moved and seconded, there's no further amendments.
Through the chair, Brian, are we able to ask staff questions in the process? It's a simple question.
Yeah. A simple question. Well, yeah, I'll accept that. We don't want to have this is a note of motion from elected members. We don't want to have the staff having to answer questions in the debate.
Simple question.
So once you've had your 5 minutes each, then I will be asking for people to either ask questions of you, speak to the motion for it or against it, and then we just simply put the motion. Okay, any questions of process?
That was the only question of the process.
Sorry, just one. So if after they've presented, we do have something we might want to tweak in it to make it acceptable to pass, we can't do that.
The reason the way I read it from Nigel, Nigel's not with us, is that only the mover at the time the notice of motion is moved, and with the agreement of the majority of those present at the meeting, may alter proposed notice of motion. Once moved and seconded, no amendments may be made to the notice of motion.
Well, so the
it's
chair,
quite clear.
I'll clarify my understanding and
This is from the Legal and Governance Manager. So I'm taking that as the way we're going to operate this.
So then what we see here, it's either a yes or
Yes.
no. That's it.
Yep.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that's traditionally how I've seen notice of motion operate.
Goodbye.
Okay, any further questions of process? Okay, so you mover and seconder are happy to present it as written?
Yes.
With the note being A, B and C are the 3 points. There's a bit of commentary on the bottom that is not part of the notice of motion.
May I speak to that, just as it may, I don't know if this is process or not, but if I did have a problem with any of it, it is actually C. Actually the final statement that states, the Taupō Water Services Committee recently adopted a new Three Waters asset management policy, which is agreeable in its intent, but is believed does not sufficiently address in practical terms the issue of affordability. I don't really agree with that. It's correct. We did agree and adopt that by majority vote. It's not believed by me that it doesn't sufficiently address in practical terms. So that part there, I would suggest should be removed, and then I'd have a much better or more comfortable view of the notice of motion.
Well, through the chair, can I just clarify, express my understanding? And I have looked back. I did actually take the time to look back on a notice of motion I presented.
I'm dealing with the correspondence you had yesterday. The closing was the legal and governance manager stating clause 27.4. The way I've read it, and I read it out to you just for is the way we're going to operate. So I don't want to debate a whole lot of notice of motion process. It's quite clear. The point Councillor Cameron made is relevant, very relevant to this. I'm assuming, having read it, that points A, B and C are the points that we're going to be voting on. The bottom piece of commentary is not part of the notice of motion.
And through the chair, hopefully my presentation will convince you.
Yeah.
That
No, I'm removing that part. Because
that's fine.
The way I read
yeah.
it is C is the notice of motion finishes with requests that this approach be applied where appropriate to work in forming the water services strategy and long-term plan. Because I, like Councillor Cameron, saw the bottom as just some commentary.
Fair enough. Remove it. Yes.
Yep.
Good.
Okay. You happy with that, Councillor Cameron? Yes. Yep. Cool. Okay. Righto. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair, first I want to acknowledge the significant challenges that staff are facing nowadays, and also point out that this notice of motion is not about opposing safe drinking water, wastewater compliance or necessary investment. It's about good governance, and specifically about ensuring this committee has a clearer and more consistent framework for not only understanding the trade-offs involved in major water services investment decisions, but also communicating that to the public in a transparent way. After all, it is because rates have got out of control that is why we will be having no more Taupō District Council after 2028. Affordability is a new popular byword, and that is what I'm talking about now. Affordability. Okay, let's start with what is required, and then what our policy says we will do. First, I'll take a direct quote, which I took from our meeting with the Water Services Authority in April, and it says, this is from the minutes, as the economic regulator going forward, the Commerce Commission would likely be responsible for monitoring whether councils were selecting the most cost-effective option for wastewater assets. I assume that applies to water and stormwater. Now, as far as our Three Waters policy is concerned, we have these two statements here. Whole of life costing, consider total life cycle cost, not just upfront capital cost, and apply a life cycle management approach to balance risks, costs and performances over the asset life. Now, these statements are fine, but who is to say that doing these things won't send us broke and put some people out of their homes because they can't afford their rates? Engineers don't always favour a Toyota when given the choice for roles, and they're the ones reporting to us. So what are the right questions we need to be asking? On my notice of motion, I've broken it down to some specifics, but in essence it boils down to these three basic questions, which are just as relevant to any household. Do we really have to do it, and what happens if we don't? What are the benefits versus costs, and what are the alternatives, and can we do it cheaper? Now, I've heard one argument put forth, but if it's mandatory and we have to do it anyway, what's the point in wasting our time trying to measure it? And the next slide, I hope, will illustrate with a lesson from another industry sector. Traffic management is an example many people are now familiar with. Over time, incremental increases in standards and compliance expectations gradually escalated costs until eventually affordability and proportionality themselves became major public concerns. And in the meantime, creating a new industry seemingly out of thin air when it used to be just an add-on to the job. Now, this is the problem in heavily regulated sectors. Standards and compliance expectations can incrementally escalate over time, while cumulative affordability impacts receive less scrutiny. The original problem was the health and safety of road workers, but I have yet to see any analysis about how much we're all paying to prevent just one accident. And people's health is also the business this committee is in. So I've thrown in a quote from the Lorax, which I say implies just as much to us. Unless we start asking the right questions, we could end up just like the road cones. And if this water committee is the one which starts sounding any alarms, believe it or not, then actually that makes us industry leaders. To clarify, this motion does not lower standards, direct operational decisions, or seek to slow necessary work. What it does do is to ask that significant investment decisions are presented with clearer options analysis, clearer affordability information, and clearer explanation of why a preferred option represents the most cost-effective long-term solution. And all of this as much as possible in plain English. Which brings us to a question, just what is a significant project? To give some practical context around what I consider significant, I've looked at the current capital program and projects over approximately the 1 million mark. That would only involve around 7 projects over the course of a year, as far as I can tell. So I don't believe this creates an unreasonable reporting burden. We could adopt that figure as a voluntary threshold later, not now, obviously. Which brings me to the final slide and wrap up. Why are we doing this anyway? Because we live in a wonderful place with a wonderful lake. We want to keep it that way, but also be a place people can afford. As elected members, we have responsibilities not only around safety and compliance, but also around affordability and transparency to our community. I believe this motion strengthens the committee's ability to fulfil that governance role and even lead the way for others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much, Duncan, for bringing this notice of motion. I certainly agree with the sentiment behind it, and I certainly agree with what you're actually saying. I think the road code is a perfect example of how we started off looking after people, and somehow or another, somewhere down the line, we ended up with walls of them across the country. I do think that your notice of motion actually strengthens the whole idea of affordability, and if you look at the asset management objectives on page 46, what they have in front of us, affordability is actually only mentioned in the last line. And I think affordability should have been actually up there in the first line. We've got cost effective, we've got sustainable, we've got well planned, we've got capability, we've got resilience, we've got all of those words, and then affordability is in the last line. And I think, as you quite rightly say, one of the reasons that we are being forced to amalgamate is because people are realising that actually affordability has come so far down the list. and we are all facing affordability issues. We'd all like to have an automatic opening garage door, but some of us can't afford it. And I think I support your motion, Duncan.
Thank you, councillor. Okay, if any comments around this notice of motion from other people in the room? Councillor Cameron.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Duncan. I actually agree with the intent of the motion. Transparency, clear options and understanding trade-offs are all really important in decision making. I also note that much of this analysis is already done through asset management planning, business cases and regulatory processes. I'm also recognising that there's strong oversight from the Commerce Commission, the DIA, which requires cost effectiveness and robust planning. I guess my only concern would be the risk of creating additional reporting, which is, time cost to ratepayers. But on the whole, I agree with the intent of the motion and I would be happy to support it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Foreman.
I do actually agree with the intention as well. I'm just a little bit concerned that on C, you're also asking for this to inform long-term plan as well, and that's not for this committee to be pushing extra work into another space. We're only here for the water services. That bit alone for me would mean I can't probably agree to this unless, and that's why I asked for the clarification at the start, that is outside of our parameters. But the other thing is something that you spoke about in your presentation that we can add as we go. I don't want to continually change the level of reporting that staff are having to do, because a lot of this I would expect are covered in what we currently have. So while I understand why it is you're asking for this, and maybe it's just that we need to dig a little bit deeper to get that information, I'm not entirely sure I can agree to this, and it might be that you go back to the drawing board to make it a little bit clearer and concise before I can agree. Because I don't want to keep coming back to this point when you've decided there's something else you want to add to it.
Councillor Mananui.
Yeah, well done, Duncan. Sandra, definitely support the intent, but I think for me it's just that balance, I think, because I think a lot of those checks and balances are in place. So, I think happy to support, but don't want that to be at an additional cost for, adding extra work and or reporting. So.
Do you wish to comment on any of those?
Through Chair. There's 2 points came out there. Are we doing it already? And the Commerce Commission should be keeping an eye on us anyway. Well, I suppose my take on that is that the Commerce Commission would be asking those questions of us, and with the preparation of this reporting, we would be able to adequately answer it. Otherwise, I see it. In terms of adding administratively, I don't believe it adds a significant administrative burden, because much of the analysis should already exist internally if we're generally seeking the most cost-effective long-term solutions. And to give some practical context, I'm primarily talking about larger strategic or capital projects, not every little thing. I mean, I mentioned the 1 million threshold. We're not going to put a threshold in today, but that demonstrated that would be around the order of half a dozen reports over the year. I don't see that as extremely burdensome, and I see it just adds another degree of responsibility. Councillor Foreman brought up the long-term plan question. We're informing the long-term plan, that's just additional information towards the long-term plan. I wasn't sure that I don't think that's contrary to anything.
I might be able to help you. I think it's outside our terms of reference anyway. I mean, we make recommendations to the full council that makes the decision. So I think our terms of reference probably cover off on the fact that in that you where appropriate to work informing the water services strategy. It does inform the long-term plan, but the long-term plan is the decision-making part of that the full council's responsible for. And I think the level of significance, Duncan, is probably a full council resolution type decision, not necessarily this committee, in terms of what is significant. I'm not sure if most councils would have a significance policy for part of the reporting on decision making. Yeah, so that would be covered in that, and I think that would supersede any value we put in here. Just can you clarify that, Tony, at all?
Through the chair, I mean, I guess just reiterating a point you just made there around terms of reference for the Water Services Committee, and I think that one of the opportunities we have as a committee is having a lot more visibility on strategic direction and projects that are coming down through the pipeline, excuse the pun, and obviously what's going to be contained in the water services strategy. And then as part of that process, we'll be covering off options analysis and what the cost of certain things are. But obviously, again, I would just bring us back to our terms of reference for this committee, with your terms of reference, I should say. And obviously, there's not that financial decision making that exists in that element. And then obviously, when we go to full council.
So I think that's what I was trying to say a little bit in terms of, I think this committee is new and we're going to see in depth some of the capital decisions going forward. So I think it's really timely what you've put forward, Duncan, and yeah, I support the intent. I suppose I just remind you all that we are around this room as governors, that you do employ or your CE employs skilled staff to make these recommendations, and I think it's great to have oversight over a lot of the decisions they are making, but we've got to be very clear that you're here as governors, not we've got to manage that boundary between governance and management, and so I'll be making sure that when we do that, we're operating in the correct manner. But apart from that, are you happy for me to put the motion now?
Just one more comment, just on the back of Duncan's comment about the Commerce Commission. I don't think it can be understated how robust that reporting is going to have to be, and we have to demonstrate cost effectiveness. It's not, well, we may have to, they may want to know, they do in detail. So I just really wanted to make that point really clear, because at some point the Commerce Commission could step in and say, you are not charging enough, you must charge more. So some of that decision making is going to be taken out of our hands.
Yeah, I'll just add a little response to that, is that I don't particularly think the Commerce Commission is going to be looking as closely at affordability that we could be through this notice of motion. That's all.
Okay, I think we're entering a debate on the Commerce Commission's role, but I think the important point is, and I drew attention before this to the Bible, the Water Service Delivery Plan. It does have a lot of what is in here well presented and well formulated by staff now, and I think in the context of what you've just said, there is a clear requirement, and remembering this has been approved by DIA, and I just wrote it down, need to make sure sufficient revenue is gathered to cover OPEX, including fully funding depreciation to support growth. See, that's a big part of of the mandate of local water done well, level of service renewals and compliance activities. So there is a whole broad approach, and affordability does come into that. I think it's really important, and I think you stated it well here. So I'm happy to put the notice of motion and ask all those in favour, say aye, or raise your hand. Any contrary? Contrary, the motion is passed. Okay, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is the presentation from the Compliance and Monitoring Lead. So welcome, Nicola and Sarah.
Good morning, good afternoon rather. I will just talk to the first few slides here in introducing compliance, and then I will hand over to Nicola, who will get into the detail on some specific areas of compliance, namely resource consents and drinking water quality assurance rules. So I thought quite importantly, whilst talking about compliance, is really outlining why compliance matters, because there's certainly a significant amount of compliance that we need to be across, and just really highlighting that we're legally required to comply, and it's really fundamental to protecting public health, the environment, council's reputation and long-term affordability. And when council operates Three Waters infrastructure, we do so as a consent holder, just like any other organisation. Obviously councils also issue resource consents, but it doesn't exempt us from the RMA simply because, we are part of a council. Like anyone, we need to comply. And with Three Waters legislation, it imposes clear statutory duties that we need to meet and require compliance with national standards and regulator direction, and failure to comply with this ends up being a breach of statute. And as we heard about at our first Water Service Committee meeting when we had Te Mata Arawai present, obviously they talked to us about the role that they play, as an independent regulator, and they have very explicit monitoring, reporting and enforcement powers. Governance accountability has increased significantly under water legislation, and councils really must demonstrate active, informed governance, and officers and elected members are expected to exercise due diligence, and decisions that knowingly defer compliance create legal and reputational risk. Another significant driver, Te Mata Arawai publishes national performance reporting, and this makes our compliance very visible. That's to the public, to central government, to media and to auditors. So there's certainly disclosure of all of our performance against legislative requirements. So just in summing that up, I think it's important to note that compliance isn't about gold plating or compliance for its own sake. It's about council meeting its fundamental obligations to the community now and into the future. Right, well, I will hand over to Nicola, who will get a little bit deeper into the compliance side, including the consents and drinking water standards.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So we're going to talk about some of the governance factors, but I'm going to take you down to the operational level so we can talk about what compliance looks down like as a daily activity. So, compliance is a tool for governance, as Sarah has just explained, but so it's not just for operational activity. By regularly reporting compliance through monthly reporting, performance reporting, we will see early visibility of issues before they escalate into enforcement actions, and this visibility supports evidence-based decision making. So we're supporting our decisions using real data, not making assumptions. Oh, actually, I just want to go back. Importantly, it also allows us confidence when we're making public statements. So we're actually making those based on real data, not assumptions. And ultimately, we're protecting council and the community in terms of public health risk and environmental risk. So just as a bit of a compliance 101, I've sort of grouped this into 3 layers, if you like. So at the top layer, we've got our legislation and who oversees us. So these are the laws that define what councils must do, how services are delivered, and what outcomes need to be achieved. And so we have obviously got the different regulators within that layer. Our Water Services Authority oversees public health and water safety. Commerce Commission, of course, is our economic regulator, and WRC provide our environmental oversight. So at a regional level, this is our next layer, we've got our resource consents and the regional plan. So this is where our ground rules sit. For example, how much water we're allowed to abstract out of the lake for water supply and how much effluent we're allowed to discharge. And the third layer is our national standards. So this is our drinking water quality assurance rules and our recently released wastewater standards. So these set out our expectations across New Zealand in a consistent manner, and they provide our benchmark or our targets for our monitoring and reporting. So in
Sarah,
short,
can I just ask, these presentations we'll put on Diligent for reference. That'd be great.
Cool. So in short, compliance is about juggling all these different layers: regulators, legislation, consents and standards. So we make sure our systems, monitoring and reporting all line up across all of those areas. So for the rest of the talk, I thought it would be really good just to talk about resource consents and drinking water quality assurance rules, because those are very heavily what our compliance monitoring activities are based on. So if we just start with the drinking water quality assurance rules, we've kind of broken this down into 6 key areas. So we've got a bunch of rules around our treatment, so we have to have different barriers in place, but we also need to have targets of water quality, so what we're trying to achieve for water being delivered from the treatment plant but right out to every connection in the community. So that's at the very extremes of our network, and also end of lines or dead ends or areas that aren't very well utilised. So one set of water quality rules for the whole scheme. So our second bunch of rules are around monitoring. So that's in the treatment plant, out in the community, or out in the environment if it's related to a wastewater activity. We have rules around sampling. Some of these are quite prescriptive: how many samples we collect, where we collect them from, and what we test. Reporting requirements, they are variable depending on if it's the rules that are for a smaller scheme or if it's for a larger scheme like Taupō. We need rules around how we respond to incidents and issues or failures, and of course there's a lot of auditing that's going on to make sure we're being truthful in what we're reporting, and we have confidence in our data. So just as a bit of a Taupō District Council perspective, as you know, we've got 15 schemes. There's around 36 to 78 different drinking water quality assurance rules for each of those. And we have reporting that is going to our regulator monthly, quarterly and annually. and I just put some little numbers there just to give you some context. Around 30 monthly reports and annually 72 different sets of data reports that are going up to the regulator. So in terms of resource consents, our 3 waters resource consents essentially give us permission to either take water or discharge to the environment. So that could be an effluent or it could be an air discharge, like from the Taupō wastewater treatment plant. And a resource consent contains a bunch of different conditions. Some of them are operational limits, like it might be a maximum volume that we're allowed to take, or a loading of nitrogen from an effluent to a land treatment site. They also specify what we need to monitor and how often we monitor. Maintenance and sometimes upgrade requirements are included in different consent conditions, and reporting and incident notification reporting as well. So currently we've got 68 active 3 waters resource consents and around 15 to 50 consent conditions in each of those. And we are reporting anywhere from daily to annually on those resource consents. And with our resource consent monitoring, we operate under a traffic light system. So green is everything is good and we're compliant. Orange, we might have some early trends or warnings that are indicating we might have a problem. And red, which is where we don't want to be in, and that's where we have a breach or an incident, like exceeding a consent condition that's going to have a public health or a major environmental health impact. So what happens if we don't comply? So it really does depend on what the consent condition or the rule is that you're not complying with, and it's something that I get asked a lot is, are we compliant? But as you have just heard, there are a lot of rules, there are a lot of resource consent conditions, so it does depend on where the failure is. So a level 1 failure might be a missed sample or a late report or a data gap. And we will get a non-compliance, but it's usually technical, and result of that is a loss of assurance or an audit failure, or we might actually might have increased scrutiny in future going forward with some of our follow-up reporting. Level 1 non-compliances are actually quite common. It's almost impossible to be perfect, so we will get non-compliance occasionally, but it's not the end of the world. So level 2, this is where we drop down into maybe we've exceeded a abstraction rate or a loading rate on a site, and that might have some more serious follow-up actions, like an education notice from the regional council or a formal warning, or we might be assigned some improvement actions and some additional monitoring. And level 3, where we don't want to be, and thankfully we very seldom are in this bracket, is where you have an incident that could cause public health or harm or environmental harm. And if you think back to our breach of our overflow on the main wastewater line, that is kind of the level 3 type failure non-compliance that we want to avoid at all costs. So one of the key messages is that most compliance failures don't start as incidents or disasters. They start as small things not being done, and then they escalate. So I thought we'd have a little bit of a talk about what monitoring is like, and actually the scale and extent of what we're doing on a operational daily basis. So monitoring is a somewhat layered approach. So we'll start with some automation, or what we refer to as SCADA, and that's where we have continuously monitored parameters coming in. So if you think of a flow rate on a water intake, or on a discharge, or a chlorine measurement at the end of a water treatment process. So they are recording data every minute, and we're getting that back. So that's our first level of monitoring. So it provides real-time alerts to our operators if there is something that is not right. Then we drop down into our operational checks. So this is things like a validation of a monitoring equipment, or physical checks of plant equipment, or disposal sites, checking for ponding runoff and all that sort of activity. We've got, as I mentioned before, quite a comprehensive sampling and monitoring program. So if you think water, it's people that go out and take chlorine or E. coli samples out within the community, and check that we're meeting those drinking water targets. And our laboratory testing is all done independently using INES accredited labs, so we should have confidence in all that data coming through. And then of course there's all the reporting of that we have to keep on top of. So we've got around 140 compliance sampling points throughout Three Waters, and that's anything from a water treatment plant, an untreated and a treated water. We've got effluent sampling, stormwater sampling, groundwater that's associated with our effluent discharges, and streams. We monitor the biosolids that's coming out of the wastewater plant, grass at our land treatment sites, soil, and also trade waste. So there's a really big variety of the types of samples we're collecting. In 2025, there were around 6,300 compliance samples collected, and on those samples around 34,500 tests were done. So there is quite a lot of information being collected. For our automation or SCADA data, every day a data stream will be reporting 1,440 data points, and just to put that into context, our new Kinloch water treatment plant analyses around 36,000 data points every single day to check that we meet our compliance obligations. So I just want to have a little photos up here, just to give you something interesting to look at. Kinloch effluent with it's a very nice effluent, Kinloch effluent. It's very clear, so that's why I put that one up. And the middle photo is actually at the Kinloch water treatment plant. That's one of our continuous monitoring points. I think that one might be chlorine. So there is there's a probe in there, and there's a constant stream of water that is passing through that, collecting a water quality data point. And the third photo there, that's one of our stormwater samplers, and twice a year we've got 10 sites. We put those down into manholes, which are very close to where the outlet into the lake mostly is, and it's got a water sensor, so when we have rainfall, it triggers it, and we take a sample and we collect for a whole range of things like nutrients, as well as oil byproducts and hydrocarbons, and a couple of other interesting things. We've done a bit of work over the last year to put in dedicated water sampling points within our network. So we've got around 50 of these, and I put some photos in here because you might see them as you're driving around. If you see a box which has a sign on it which says water sampling point, we've been deliberate where we've installed these, so they are often coming out of a reservoir before it goes to the community, or towards the end of the line where we can check that we've got good quality of water in the whole scheme. Here another photo there of our Kinloch water treatment plant and one of our sampling taps, and interestingly, I think it's interesting, we've got 77 groundwater monitoring bores throughout the district, so usually we're monitoring those every quarter. So this one here, we will put a monitoring bore after an effluent discharge so we can see what the effect is before that water gets to a receiving water like Lake Taupō. So yeah, we've got our structured monitoring program, but then we also sometimes need to do a little bit of extra analysis or sampling to troubleshoot, and particularly if we have an incident, for example, a wastewater overflow is the obvious one. So this slide is really about the reality of compliance and monitoring. Things don't always run perfectly, incidents happen, but what is actually important is that compliance doesn't always start with a big dramatic event. Sometimes it's obvious, like a sewer overflow or a ponding, which is what we see up there with that mooring site, and other times it's more subtle. And I just put this little line up there, which you don't need to look at too much, but this is a SCADA trend, and this trend is coming out of a reservoir, and as you can see it looks very angular because it doesn't have enough data on it. So if we lose data, we'll get square trends, and that's actually a non-compliance. So it's not a big ponded. And by the way, that is rainfall, that is not effluent on that very far left photo, but it's not always clear like that, or a stormwater discharge, so someone's put something down the network and it's come out into the lake, or a sewer overflow. It can sometimes present in a data trend, which is just as important to actually monitor as the visual stuff. And then there's a little snip of one of our lab reports. So this one is a failed non-compliance report. This is an arsenic result from the Motuapa water treatment plant that has exceeded its health limit. So we will very shortly not have that problem once we commission our nice new plant. So I thought I would just touch on a couple of compliance highlights for each of our 3 waters, and then I'll leave you alone. So for the compliance year for 25 to 26 to 30th of April, for our water, we've got 4 of our 15 plants are fully compliant. So that might sound bad, but it's not too bad. We're actually doing quite well. We've got Kinloch, Omori and Whareroa that have been completed this year, so we can add those to that tally because they have been fully compliant since they've been commissioned. And we've also got additional interim treatment at Centennial, Hatapi and Moritere. So although they're not fully compliant, their risk has dropped substantially. So that's a really good news story. In progress, we have got our Motuapa treatment plant upgrade that's progressing. We've got our network monitoring program, the sampling boxes that I just showed you, that's almost completed that rollout of those. We've got ongoing consent renewals at Tirohonga, Turangi water treatment plants, and I think we're doing pretty well with our management of our non-compliance as they're presenting. So, and of course, what's coming up is the connection of Centennial to Taupō, arsenic removal at Moritere, and a few SCADA automation improvements that are to be planned. So wastewater, we're again performing fairly well, and when we get through this year, we'll be providing a good summary of how compliance looks across the board. A lot of the improvements with performance on the wastewater side is because we've installed online instrumentation, so that SCADA automation data coming back is providing a lot faster, tighter controls of how those treatment plants are operating, and the effluent quality is looking good. In progress, we have an ongoing abatement notice from an overflow near the Control Gates Bridge that we had last February, so we just provide regular updates to our regional council on that, and some minor non-compliance issues. One of our main risks that we've got coming up is around the nitrogen loading to the Taupō land treatment sites, which I think Mike has talked about in previous meetings. So that's something on the table that we're going to have to work through to improve our compliance going forward. And for stormwater, again, high level of compliance. We've got some operational improvements that we're making as far as managing maintenance and monitoring, and we've improved a lot of our data capture so we can ensure that we're following up on any issues as they arise. And we're actually, with the help of our comms team, rolling out a bit more public education, because a lot of people just don't really join the dots about how they manage their properties, particularly in the CBD, and what's coming out those stormwater outlets. Yeah, so the key messages for today is that compliance is core business. It protects public health, environment, council's legal and reputational position. It's large and it's complex. There's many rules, there's many conditions, and we try our best to keep to all of those, but don't be surprised if you hear non-compliance, because full compliance is almost impossible. We've got a layered monitoring approach to provide that quality assurance around the data that we're collecting, instantaneous data, sampling out in the network, and as well as our operational checks. Yeah, very high scale. There are lots of samples, there's lots of testing, and we have recently made targeted investment, and I'd like to say that that has really improved our compliance across the board. So that's it from me. If you have questions.
Cool, thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Sarah. That was really interesting, and I couldn't help thinking, I'm involved in farming industry, and every weekly farming newspaper comes out, talks about blimmin' compliance. But I think of a dairy farmer having to monitor their water quality, their milk quality, their effluent management, their shared audits. I mean, we're in the food game with probably the most common thing, drinking water. So we are facing compliance issue like every other food manufacturer, and that's the new norm, I suppose. But questions? Councillor.
Yeah, just an observation for one. I do have a question about observation. Yes, compliance was the reason traffic management escalated so much over the years as well, by the way. But my question is, and the granny flats legislation, and perhaps it's well overstated, and I suspect it very much is, but granny flats, I'm assuming granny wants a toilet and a shower. I mean, there's not if a proliferation of granny flats go in, I mean, this sort of stuff has to be taken into consideration, does it not? Or are they just going in willy-nilly?
I think, well, Tony might want to add to it, but really I think that sits with our, building services team who are across the compliance of that activity. And I guess through that, with any building services, where there is an aspect, which I guess, leads on to water or wastewater management, there are existing rules around that, so that's not a Three Waters sort of compliance-led activity.
I think when Mike is planning his future treatment plants and the capacity of those, they factor in development, which would include some of that. So you plan for increasing loads and you have to make sure your infrastructure can treat in order to meet your effluent target that has been set under the rules or the standards. So our rule is always the same. It doesn't matter if we've got more connections or an increasing load to our treatment plant, but we need to make sure our resource consent and our treatment plants can accommodate development as it happens. So yeah, our target stays the same and our treatment stays the same unless we upgrade to accommodate.
Oh, just a basic question though. If someone's putting in a granny flat on their property which has wastewater and stormwater connections, that they have to apply for a consent for that activity, don't they?
Yeah, through Chair. I mean, certainly there'll be existing services for that property that's already there, and then a building team would be involved in how that granny flat will be serviced. Obviously, there's some relaxation of those, which we all know about recently. And just to also add to that, obviously from a water compliance perspective, we have a very clear boundary of where we have to be compliant with our drinking water. But certainly, I think some of that will be picked up from a water perspective when Tom does his presentation and starts talking about water metering, for example. But yes, any connections to infrastructure is that there is a process that has to go through around connections. And just I'd like to make sure then that none of those slip under the radar when there's illegal connections, for example.
Oh, thank you. I've got three questions. When we had DIA come and talk to us, they talked about water in the district that we were not actually responsible for, but if there was more than X number of people on a water supply, then we were responsible for it. Is there anything going on in that area at present?
I think the water regulator is working on some of those small private schemes, but for now our focus is on our community schemes. So I have been asked a couple of questions because obviously we know about some of those. Some of those we've been monitoring as private water suppliers for them, but yeah, our focus at the moment is on our community schemes, and our smallest one of those is Motateri. So
the next question I was going to ask you, do we have any consents for bore water or aquifer water?
Yes, we do.
We do?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So
do we have
some
many?
of our water supplies actually source from groundwater, Atimuri, Wharero, Whakamaru.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's
groundwater supply.
And the third question is a very simple one. We're still using the aluminium trout on the drains that are going into the lake so that people can see where the water's
That's
going.
a really good point, because we recently found a box
Wow,
and
done.
had conversations about how we roll those out again, because some of them have come off. So this is
I've got one that's broken that needs
yeah.
replacing. Yes.
so it's a really visual and very effective way of getting people thinking about what's going down the drain, because people just don't think about it really.
No.
So so our comms team are working with us on a new Three Waters space online, and some really cool videos of cute kids going through water treatment plants and things. So so the grates is a good question, and hopefully
Because
you'll see more.
it makes people just stop and look and think, why would there be a trout on a drain? You're right. It just because stormwater is a worry everywhere for all of us. Thank you. That was great.
Yeah, just a quick question about the compliance. You said, I think there was 14,000 or so tests a day. So if there is an issue with the drinking water, how quickly would we get a heads up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if it's drinking water, how our monitoring testing contract works, which Eurofins are our contractor for that, we have different reporting time turnarounds depending on what it is they're testing. So for drinking water, they must do a same day test, and they will do a screen of that first thing the next morning, and if it's not looking right, they will call it through. So we will have the day after sampling, we will know if there's a fail. That's for an E. coli test result. But they are also measuring chlorine at the tap. So if you don't have chlorine, your risk of microbial contamination is very high. So we would have that result instantly. So we should know on the day of sampling that we have a problem, but sometimes we don't, and we get a surprise test result. We don't have many positive E. coli's, but unfortunately we have had them in the past. But
Cool. So we can respond quite quickly. Is the point.
yeah,
Yeah, cool.
quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think my question was going to be sort of what the civil defence hat on, and should we be in a state of emergency, was kind of, I think you've answered, what's the redundancy in the drinking water system, which it sounds like a day. Is that right, or is there some lag in there? I guess it would depend on what can get monitored or not.
It depends on the issue, and it depends on the incident, and it also depends on the treatment plant. So within our treatment plants, we have business continuity plans. So, we would have a scale or a series of events that would lead to the treatment plant not producing water. But the operations team have to have some plans in place in order to understand where those risks are. So in a civil defence emergency, so for instance, if it was a flooding of the stream near Hatapi, which damaged that supply, I mean, that one is a small one, we could probably supply it from Taupō. So, but if it was the Taupō supply, we would have to look at what the event was and what part of the treatment it would affect. But we have had E. coli's detected in drinking water before, and also, unfortunately, a couple of contaminated reservoirs. So we have some processes in place in how we communicate to the community, and how we would, what sort of messaging we would send out, like if it was a boil water notice or an alternative drinking water source, or
Thanks. That was kind of a bit of a multi-layered, many-answered question, but
Oh, look, I just wanted to firstly just appreciate and thank Nicola for her insights into what she does on a daily basis. And certainly for a long period of time, we only had Nicola, and now Nicola's team's got some additional support in there. And certainly ever since the new drinking water quality assurance rules came in, things have ramped up. Things have also ramped up with Te Mata Anawai being our water services authority regulator. So I hope you benefited from some of those statistics, knowing that these things aren't just monitored Monday to Friday. This is a 24/7, 365 days a year, dedicated team, heaps and heaps of data. So we've got some really committed people in the back office who This is what they do. So I hope it's just giving you some insight. And again, I just wanted to come back to the opportunity we have here to share this with the Water Services Committee on an ongoing basis around how we're tracking and how we're doing, and then what those improvement plans are behind all that.
Cool, thank you, Tony. And responding to Councillor Greenslade's talk of small schemes, this is a nationwide issue. Give you an example, Aotearoa had a rural scheme in Arahina, which they have turned back to stock water only. So it was originally set up as a rural scheme and houses have connected to it, but rather than go to the cost of treating, they've just said, look, people, if you want to still take water off that scheme, that's fine, but you are responsible for treating it. One of the challenges is some of the Clutha district, you might have read some of their challenges over the years. They've got rural schemes that are connected to towns. So it'll be rural town, and of course the compliance nightmare of do you treat all the source water when 70% of it goes in troughs? How do you manage it? So there's real challenges, but of course some of those schemes that are private rural schemes, if they throw their hands up in the air and say we can't do this, the way the legislation, I'm not sure if it still is, the council will be required to step in and pick it up. So there's some real challenges in a lot of those small rural schemes. Anyway, I just thought I'd add that for information. So we have a resolution to accept this, receive this presentation. Would someone like to move that? Move Councillor Foreman, seconded Councillor Greenslade. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much. And our next presentation is from our Asset Managed Water, Tom Swindales. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here. Just probably echo Tony's comments. I mean, what Nicola does is pretty amazing. It's kind of, and pretty thankless in a way from you know, she sits there with this data everywhere, you know, and has to report that. So it is kind of, and I think about what we've done, and you'll see some of the stuff we've done in this presentation coming up. Sorry, I better put it up there. But yeah, there's a lot of new things that Nicola has to get her head around, and yeah, thanks, Nicola. It's amazing. So what I'm going to present on is two kind of key areas. One being, it's got that compliance word in there again, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of the treatment compliance I'm going to focus on, and it's just to give you a bit of a background. It's a bit of a kind of district tour in a way, just to kind of give you a bit of context of some of the stuff we do and have done kind of over the past 5 years, as well as a little bit of other history, and then a little bit about a big project coming up, so our water conservation program. So, and reflecting on what to present today, I kind of found this slide, which was from my first year of work. It was actually for an internal presentation. 2018, so 2016 was Havelock North. This was after the second government inquiry. You can kind of read into some of those pictures, but the ministry was getting a lot of grief at that point. You know, the inquiry had come out and kind of shown that they were pretty useless in what they'd been doing, and you know, since then we've had just crazy legislation change, and I'll sort of reflect back on this slide a little bit as we go through the next couple. But first of all, just a real quick 101 overview. Man, it's not great to read on there, is it, in the white? But we've got 15 water supply schemes across the district, all the way from the north, you know, Mangakino, Whakamaru, Ātiamuri, right down to Turangi and the Western Bays. And we supply water to residential, commercial customers, rural, lots of lifestyle, irrigation, really common in lots of the Taupō District Council parks, pools, hockey turf. We have bulk tankers that take water, and they often take water out to private customers, you know, in summer when their tanks run dry. Obviously the fire service, a really important customer in a way. We need to make sure obviously they can access water when they need to. We also use a lot of water ourselves and making sure the network is operated appropriately. You'll see the teams out there flushing quite often. Often that's testing hydrants to make sure they provide the right flow and pressure, or it might be just moving water where it's become stagnant to make sure the chlorine levels are appropriate throughout. And then kind of a user, but leakage, really actually still a big issue for us, and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. And this is both private, so from within people's homes and properties, and loss on our own system. Little bit of history. This Drinking Water Standards 2005, this is the first one I saw when I came out of university in my first job. And I just put it up there because any standard kind of before this point was, and up to 2007, was basically there just as a voluntary type standard. So the Health Act 1956, I think, was the first legislation that said you got to provide potable water, and it basically said that, hey, you can, the ministry can also implement standards, and they did that kind of from the 80s right through to 2007, where they then government implemented this Health and Drinking Water Amendment Act, and this is where the first teeth came in. So they were just a little bit blunt though. So duty to take all practicable steps to comply. That was sort of the wording, and from a positive perspective, Taupō District Council then did some things. So the Taupō water treatment plant was upgraded, massive project, totally changed how Taupō was supplied water. There used to be a couple of plants and totally different sort of separate areas, and that we got this beautiful asset which we've still got today on the lakefront. It's been upgraded a couple of times since. And similar time, Turangi, Mangakino and Waitahanui were all upgraded. So really important with those though. Massive funding from the Ministry of Health to help get those projects over the line, and I imagine if we didn't have that funding, we'd be dealing with them kind of now with these other plants we've been doing. And through this time, standards continue to evolve, and we had this kind of watershed event with Havelock North, big turning point for the industry, the inquiries that occurred, and this was the last standards the ministry put out in 2018, which was a little bit of a knee-jerk following the inquiries. And sort of this brings us to a point in time, and in 2018 when I started, that red statement there was basically identical to 2021. So we had 18 water schemes at that time, 3 capable of compliance. And I use the word capable because, as Nicola kind of presented, just because you've got a treatment plant that can comply, you don't necessarily comply because there's all these other things you have to do. But obviously you want your treatment plant to be capable. So with 2021, there'd been no real progress since those Turangi Mangakino projects and Taupō projects, and the main reason for that was rates funding was ring-fenced by scheme. So if we wanted to upgrade Kinloch for $5 million, Kinloch ratepayers had to pay for it. So that the duty to kind of do everything practicable, council said, oh, we can't afford it. And that happened in multiple LTPs. The drinking water projects were put in year 4, and then the next LTP they were put in year 4 again, and that happened over and over. And then we made a change in 2021, so district-wide funding came in, and from kind of that point onwards, we've then been able to deliver and kind of get ourselves closer to ahead of the game. And kind of as Nicola showed, we've got all these, Water Services Act, Drinking Water Quality Assurance Rules, aesthetic values. These are the things we've then had to kind of follow to deliver. So just bear in mind that red statement, 18 water schemes, 3 capable of compliance, and then this is kind of the journey we've been on. So some nice pictures for you. These 4 pictures, these are 4 different schemes and projects we've done. Top right, Acacia Bay, upgraded in 2022. So this was a connection to Taupō. So we assessed it, we considered cost, what was the most cost-effective solution. It wasn't building a fancy membrane plant, which we would have needed because the intake was out of the lake. Instead, we connected it to Taupō 3.5 kilometres of pipe, big project, done and dusted. Bottom right, Bonshore Park, done in 2024, 5 kilometres of pipe out into a little rural subdivision where we had some bores which were affected by thermal ground, so they were often warm, they had arsenic in them as well. Now connected to Taupō, fantastic. Whakamoenga Point was connected off Acacia Bay in 2025, another 4 kilometres of pipe. And then bottom left there, Centennial, so this one's in design. We're hoping to tender any day now, and that'll be the 4th scheme. So from those 18 schemes, once these 4 are done, we'll be down to 14. So instead of building treatment plants in all these places, we would have needed quite expensive treatment plants to deal with the arsenic. In these cases, we've been able to connect to Taupō, which I think is quite cool. There's another 6 plants here which we've delivered across 2023 to 2025. We've done them 2 at a time, all done by the same contractor, all built off-site, transported to site and then craned into position. So River Road and Whakamaru were first, Ātimuri and Waihaha second, and Tirohanga and Whareroa just completed last year. They all include UV disinfection, pH correction, so that brings the pH of the water up a little bit so it's less corrosive, doesn't dissolve heavy metals and things in the network or in your own plumbing. And then chlorination of some description, be it chlorine gas, or in the case of Whareroa, we've used hypochlorite because it's on the reserve there, and chlorine gas is not too good if you have a leak in kind of a public space. So,
Tom, can I ask the long length of transportation, do you have to refresh any treatment that might be, I think of dead end pipes with chlorine.
Yep.
Do you have to do any refreshing, or?
We don't. So we don't have any additional kind of chlorine dosing at this stage. It is something. So in I think it's next year we've got some money to look at following the addition of all these new sample points, some additional monitoring, including some network monitoring we're going to install that'll kind of help us better understand chlorine on those in those longer networks. In the case of Acacia Bay, Whakamoenga Point and Bonshore, we were basically pumping water to an existing plant we had, and so we've actually got chlorine meters already installed there, so we're sort of monitoring the chlorine in those locations, and we'll continue to do so, and it hasn't kind of deteriorated, which is great, and it's probably because of the great treatment from the Taupō plant has meant the chlorine's not getting used up en route. But it is, we actually allowed some money in this LTP to look at dosing additional chlorine, but we haven't at this stage needed it. Yeah, so all of these plants, these are about $1 million plants, as I say, completed over kind of a 3-year period of commissioning, but a lot of work prior to that going into these. And then finally the 4 big ones, which are the 4 sites that we assessed and decided drawing out of the lake was the most economical solution still. Top left, Kinloch, which was commissioned last year, Amori, which some of you visited last week with us where we opened it, Motuopa, which hopefully is starting commissioning in a couple of weeks, so we should be able to open that one later this year. In Hātepe, where we've had a lot of challenges with land, we've finally kind of agreed a concession with DOC, cleared some land, we're into detailed design, so hopefully 2027 we'll see that one complete. These ones, we utilise some coagulation using a chemical that binds the arsenic, binds organic matter. We filter it through membranes, we pH correct and we chlorinate, and we also have a special process, an advanced oxidation process that can deal with the risk of algae in the lake, so from algae blooms, which can be quite toxic. So our kind of current compliance state, 15 water schemes at the moment, 10 capable of compliance from a treatment perspective. As Nicola mentioned, we have protozoa barriers that we've kind of installed on some of these smaller schemes as temporary to kind of buy us a little bit of time while we complete the major upgrades. And the future plan being that we'll hit this 14 water schemes with 14 capable of compliance once we complete the final upgrades and the connection of Centennial. And the little snip there is my from that 2018 presentation. I was actually quite surprised by that it looks like we'll get pretty close to hitting that. all sites compliant by 2028. I do think we've probably spent a little bit more money than probably what was originally budgeted, but there's been a lot of change since then, I guess. So, look, that's the initial journey, and then I'm gonna move on to the Water Conservation Program chat. So happy to take any questions if there's any others about the kind of that little part of it.
Thank you, Tom. I always find your presentations interesting. I think I was a water baby in another life. What's the expected life expectancy of these stations, plants?
That's a really good question. Like the plants themselves, and like the big ones, we've designed to quite a high seismic standard. But within those buildings, like the instruments might, for instance, last 10 years. The pipe, a lot of it's stainless steel pipe, will last 100 years. So everything kind of has different levels of age that it'll last. The membranes, it's the same membranes we've used at Taupō, and they've actually, they're forecast to have really long life based on the amazing source water that we've actually got from the lake. They're actually not under a hell of a lot of pressure in a way compared to what they could treat. So effectively there's renewals needed throughout their life, but they should be standing for 50 to 100 years kind of thing, still with some decent maintenance.
Two questions actually. One is the Havelock North incident. And you implied, yes, overreaction. In your opinion, have we paid a lot for not so much benefits due to that overreaction?
You might have misinterpreted there. I don't know. I certainly don't think it was an overreaction. At least 4 people died from Havelock North, and many people sick, and many people remain, in a state where they've been impacted by that. So I guess I was just stressing the legislation change that has occurred, kind of since that really critical turning point in the industry.
Oh, yeah, no, my basic take on it, I don't know much of the detail of it, was that, yes, they did stuff up over there, but as tend to happen, they changed legislation that affects everybody, and everyone has to sort of pay the cost, if you like, for their mistakes. That was my reading of that. But my second question is a left field one, and it's probably not even sure this is the right forum, but I'll ask it anyway, because your asset management is your thing. Now, I attended a webinar presentation, an LGNZ discussion with DIA, and it was talking about this head start, the conversation about amalgamation, and one thing that stuck out at me is that because they're the ones really, as far as I know, will be advising the government on who amalgamates with who, but they did advise that the two big things they'll be looking at is transport and water catchment. And I don't think transport is so relevant for here, but as far as water catchment is concerned, where do you think that might lead DIA to be thinking Taupō would be a good district to amalgamate with?
Yeah, I think from a water catchment perspective, we sit under the Waikato Regional Council, which is effectively regional councils are generally done by water catchment. So you'd tend to look north, I would say.
Yeah, that was my impression. We're the source of the Waikato River, so it kind of that would lead me to think that's what they're thinking anyway.
Okay, if you want to carry on to the second part.
Yeah, right. So the next little bit of work, or big bit of work, I guess, is a key project in the upcoming water services strategy. Maybe I used the wrong terminology, but I still tend to lean on long-term plans, so apologies if I use that a few times. But so the key drivers around this one are, currently we don't really use water efficiently, and this graph here, maybe it's a little bit hard to read, but you don't need the detail really, but it's a graph of from Taumata Arawai, all of the councils, and it's effectively their residential consumption. This has been done for years and years and years, and Taupō has always sat kind of in the upper quartile. It actually looks a bit better. This is probably the best I've seen it. There's another one here from a couple of years ago which split it into large, medium and small councils, and you can see us circled there as a medium council, you know, the worst medium council for average daily residential water use. So it is an area we need to improve. We also have really high leakage and highly variable leakage across our schemes. This is a graph of leakage per connection per day. Turangi is on the left there, really high. We lose nearly 50% of our water there. Taupō is actually shown in this, you know, looking pretty good, and the red line in the middle is actually our district average. So we're not too bad in this space, but to put it in context, in Taupō we lose nearly Olympic-sized swimming pool of water every day. So it's still a lot of water that's disappearing that we're treating to quite high levels. And the main statement here, the main driver is actually, if we don't do anything, so if water consumption stays the same, leakage stays the same, and we have the forecast growth that we are seeing, we're going to have some impacts. And this is sort of some demonstration of the impacts. This is for the Taupō scheme, and this is based on our current growth model. So investment needs over 30 years, so this is whole of life cost, 85 million if we hit our medium growth scenario, and more like 104 if we hit high growth. This means a brand new treatment plant in 10 years time, and a further upgrade within that 30 years as well, and significant consent risk, right? So if you've got to upgrade your treatment plant, you also need more water, so you've got to go to Waikato Regional Council, who are going to say, okay, why do you need more water? Why don't you use your water a bit better? We also need another 20 million litres of reservoir storage if we don't do anything. So, and to put that in context, we've just built a reservoir up beside the Botanical Gardens that's 2 million litres, so we'd need 10 of those. That was about $3 million worth. And some OPEX there, and I'll bring this up later when I show you kind of the preferred option. But also a little comment there about strategic direction, you know, like doing nothing I don't think would convince anyone that we're doing the right environmentally responsible thing. And just a picture to kind of put this into, for those that like a picture. Blue line here, Taupō water treatment plant capacity, our current capacity. The green line's our current storage capacity. The red line is, and dotted line is our demand over time with our growth. Along the bottom we've got years. So if we start in 2026 on the left, you can see that our current demand is below our storage capacity, below our water treatment plant capacity. We're okay. We reasonably quickly exceed our reservoir capacity. We've got a few planned coming up. And in about 10 years we hit that treatment plant, you know, suddenly we're not producing enough water. And basically by the end of 30 years we've got that 15 million litres a day shortfall of treated water and 20 million litres shortfall of reservoir storage. So it's quite a sort of stark picture, I would say. So our plan is a water conservation program, and there's multiple facets to this, but the first and most important facet is universal water metering. And so this is common. We've kind of had a couple of like high-level workshop chats about this. It's really common across New Zealand now. Over 50% of people in New Zealand are paying for water by metre. And it has really significant impacts. You know, it's proven time and time again. I think Nelson saved 36% off peak. Tauranga, when they implemented meters, 30% of their water was saved. Kapiti, 26%. So big savings. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail on this, but it's not the only thing, right? There's multiple other bits to this program that will see us save more water. Data capture and benchmarking. So this is making sure we know who our customers are, how much water we're using where, so when we roll out more initiatives, we can benchmark and understand, did that initiative help or not? Obviously, education, community engagement, we need to make sure our people have the education to know how to save water. Many and there's multiple initiatives and things we can put in here, but there's some good examples. Leak detection and pressure management, we do some of that now. acting as a role model. You know, are our facilities efficient? You know, do we need to do some little upgrades to make sure we're using water efficiently? Having a look at rainwater standards, grey water reuse, those sorts of things. Providing support, so it might be technical support, a technical plumber that goes around and provides some advice to people to help them save water, find leaks, or financial support where people can't afford to fix a leak in their home. Things like making sure we've got enforcement action processes in place, and fancy things like you know, giving people a portal where they can actually view their water use in real time. All these sorts of things can contribute to improved water conservation, and so we're looking at a program that we'll have a bit of a further chat with through the LTP process. We're likely going to need some people to help with this, maybe not immediately, but you know, once the program sort of moves down the track, there'll likely be, you know, a water conservation officer we may need. But yeah, it's a big bit of work, and there'll be multiple points that we come and talk to you about it. But just to sort of touch a bit more on the most interesting bit, I guess, which people tend to dwell on, which is the water metering.
So that, can I ask a question? Thanks, Tom. One of the things I'd like to just say to you is I think we've got an issue with comms when we talk about water conservation, because people look at that pond and go, what are you talking about? I think you need to include the word treated water conservation. I think you've got to differentiate, because it was actually funny, because I actually had that conversation with somebody before I came onto council. What are they talking about, water conservation? Come on, everybody can see we've got tons of water. No, Sandra, it's paid for in the sense of it costs this amount of money, and if you're watering your garden with it or having a half-hour shower, you're using treated water, which is where the cost is. So that's just a thing that just happened to me, because I was like, go away, you know, what are you talking about? That's that. The other thing, I presume you're talking about the Turangi Township, are you, when you're talking about the water loss? You're not talking about the Turangi Ward?
No, Turangi Township.
The Turangi Township. So currently we're getting all the water pipes replaced. When is that going to be finished?
To say we're getting all of them replaced is a big call.
But
There's a lot of pipes in Turangi still that are near end of life. But we've got a couple of big projects at the moment. But there's going to be a lot more projects in Turangi to get on top of that. Yeah.
Right, all right. And of course, being Turangi, they'll have all worn out at exactly the same time, because they were all put in at the same time.
Yep,
and
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But thank you for that. It's great feedback around treated water. You never quite know how people interpret what you put out there, but that's good. So currently we do bill for water with high water users effective. It's kind of what our bylaw says. So commercial, rural lifestyle, anyone with a big connection. We've got about 2,000 of those out there. They're a combination of manual meters and some drive-by meters, and I'll go into that on the next slide. Generally billed 6 monthly, some big users monthly or 3 monthly. Leaves about 18,000 users that we aren't billing for water. And just on our little bit on financially, so currently we bill everybody this targeted water rate. It's around about $1,000 at the moment, so everyone pays that regardless. And the metered customers only pay more if they use that amount of water during the year, and then they start to pay more at that point. So water's about $2 a metre cubed in Taupō, so they basically get about 500 metres cubed in the year free, and then once they use more than that, they start paying at $2 a metre cubed. And I think as governors, it's probably, you will, as this program moves, hopefully, through the process, and we do look at universal water metering in more detail. I'm sure you'll get questions, about the revenue gathering, that sort of thing. And I do stress, that is not the focus here, right? We need the same amount of revenue, but it's this user pays thing, right? The people that use a lot may end up paying a bit more. Those that, little granny in her little granny flat, hopefully we can actually reduce that targeted rate a little bit for her, and sort of balance things if she's not using much water at all. So there's lots of things we can do to play with that over time.
Could I just ask, I thought it was interesting that even with a water meter, if they're Spartan users, they won't pay less than the $9.57. That's what you said, wasn't it? they won't pay less, but they might pay more.
Yeah, so at the moment, everybody connected to water supply pays that $9.57.
Okay, yeah, that seems a little bit.
Are you suggesting that when there are meters, that granny will still pay the same amount? Because I don't think that's what you said, was it?
No, I was saying that the 2,000 who do have the meters won't pay less than $1,000 because that's just the way we've got it set up. I thought that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everybody pays $1,000
Yeah.
whether you're metered or not. If you use more than that value of water, you pay more if you're metered.
No, okay. Yeah.
That's just how it's set up
Yeah, at the
currently. and
moment, yes,
so
okay,
a big step, and I'll come to that, in this process, we'll be having a chat about how we bill for water. So,
And just off the cuff question, because the talk about water meter. I mean, what's a rough cost it would cost each connection to put a water meter in, just for context of, you know?
yeah, so got some props.
Oh, right, yeah.
This is our drive-by water meter that we've currently got out there. I can pass it around. I think this is a failed one actually, hence I've got it. But there's three types here up on the screen. Manual meter reader. So Phil, some of you may have met Phil. He drives around, lifts the box lid, pokes his hand in, hopes there's no spiders, reads the meter. Has to do that every single property, you know. He's got many of them to do. The drive-by, he literally can drive past, in some cases 500 metres, and it'll bing to him. So it's pretty amazing tech. Saves a lot of meter reading time, health and safety, and that sort of thing. And the trial, so we're going to have a look at a trial for, this one also screws into our manifold there. This is a advanced metering infrastructure style meter. So this one will talk to a radio network. You also get ones that will talk through to cell phone networks. And in this case, Phil can stay at his desk. So pretty cool. It's new stuff, new tech coming out, and basically our plan, which it's already in the LTP. We've got funding this year, is to run a little pilot. So we've got some manual meters, we've got some drive-by. We're going to do a tender. Hoping to go out in the next couple of weeks for this tender to select an AMI technology, and we want to pilot that across the Acacia Bay and Markborough, where topology is quite challenging, right, for communications. Want to test this so that basically our project plan, have a year test. At the end of that, we can assess drive-by, manual, AMI, and decide what's the right tech to take forward for Taupō District into a universal rollout. As I sort of stated before, multiple hold points. So initially the project funding approvals through the LTP, rating policy, difficult properties, so cross leases. They've got one meter, 3 properties. How do you build them? It's all been done before by other councils, but we need to make a decision on what we do. When are we going to start billing? Are we going to do some mock billing so people get an idea first and can change their practices, or do we go straight into it? The high level plan is that we roll out district-wide meters between 2028 and 2030, and we can bill from any time beyond that point. And this is what it looks like if we do it. So instead of our $85 to $104 million, we're looking at 39 to 63, so roughly $40 million saving. We don't need a new treatment plant, so our consent risk is gone. We do need some more storage, but it's kind of a quarter of what we'd need if we don't do anything. But interestingly, in that OPEX one, which I mentioned earlier, so OPEX actually goes up, of course. Why? You've got to read the meters, right? So you need people, or you need, in this case, systems to do it. This is kind of what it looks like. Water saved, so we've done a lot of work in this space. We've got an expert that does our water loss calcs for us every year. He's then crunched the numbers to estimate for us, in Taupō, we're looking at a 26% peak saving. And this is just for that water meter rollout, right? On top of that, other initiatives you roll out over time, hopefully that green line flattens out and, you know, maybe we never need a new treatment plant. This is the financial graph. I quite like this one. See what you think. 2 seconds to explain it. The red line is if we do nothing, right? Gets all the way up to this $85 million mark. And the columns are the investment. So early on, some reservoirs around the middle there, big water treatment plant upgrade, more reservoirs, more water treatment plant upgrades later on. The green lines, if we install meters. So obviously at the start, we've got some big investment. So you've got our green columns there. And you'll notice the green line goes up a bit faster. It's a bit steeper. That's because the OPEX is a bit more, right? But by the end of that 30 years, you know, you're $45 million less that you've spent. So it's a pretty good message, I think. Interested in your views. Final thoughts. It's obviously a really big project for the district. Lots of community interest, I'm sure. What we'd love, like obviously it's not we're not doing this tomorrow. We're not rolling out meters and billing. You know, it's probably a 5-year project. We'd love to get you guys on board and give you first-hand experience where we can, and our staff. And other councils have done this sort of thing too. We are working with some of them quite closely on what's worked for them. So what we'd like to do is once our pilot gets going, if you're keen, you can volunteer. We'll install one of these for you.
Yes, we'll have one. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll all have one.
And then we'll benchmark you, right? We'll anonymise the data so you don't have to know. No one has to know what water you're using. Or you can tell everyone, you know, it depends, it's your call. And an example there on the right is sort of a similar thing from the electricity area. You know, you can compare yourself with your neighbours. With water, we'd probably do, you know, you tell us how many people in your household, litres per person per day, you know. So to give you first-hand experience and our staff, it'll be quite a fun little thing, so we'll stay in touch about that. But look, happy to take questions. I know we're probably way over time, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask Tom, so that will do away with the $1,000 charge, will it? Or will there still be a charge, like a flat charge for the water?
That's all for council to decide. So what will happen is we will come, you know, there'll be multiple points we come back to the committee and council to go, right, we need a decision on difficult properties, we need a decision on rating policy, how are we going to bill? Yeah, it could be that you could have no targeted rate and you could just do it all through the meter, but big risks if you do that. If people don't use enough water, you don't collect enough revenue.
Well, that's where I'm going, and the Chair will be well aware of the Lions Company situation where it was, you know, completely ridiculous when it came to holiday homes, who of course really never paid their way ever, and the load of course went on to the residents. And when we're talking, I don't know about the wider district, but certainly in Turangi Ward, 40% holiday homes, so there's a real balancing act there going forward. I see lots of nodding heads.
Yeah, look, as I say, big decision around that. There'll still be a targeted rate of some description, but as I say, it'd be nice to tweak that down a bit so that those that use less water are rewarded and incentivised, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, I just want to say I love this project because it encourages us to conserve and to actually do better and have that educational side of it. So, yay. But I hadn't seen the numbers before about what we could potentially save. I was actually thinking it would cost about the same. So, glad to see that. Thanks.
That's great. Just for, they were just Taupō numbers too, okay? Like there's other numbers across the other schemes that we need to work our way through with the growth model, but the Taupō numbers kind of demonstrate the significant benefit.
Yeah, no, look, I might finally get around to fixing that leaky tap. But just a rough shot. I know you're going to go tender. You don't know the price, but just rough cost. Like what are those? One of those fancy ones.
Sorry, I
out
didn't
of the box.
answer your question,
out of the box.
did I? Yeah. So, well, it depends how many you buy in that. But the early work we did with one of the providers, one of the big providers that's really trying to get into the game. One of these was about $230. Interestingly, these are about $450, and we've been putting these in for a bit. But I think some of these guys, the thing is, they you actually pay. It's a bit like once you've put one in, you then need to pay for their comm system, right, and their platform, and so there's a bit of a software as a service that kind of then comes with it after. So they potentially, tweak down the actual meter cost to try and catch you hook, line and sinker, I suppose, later. And that's why we're really keen to assess the 3 different techs, do this pilot, and decide what's right for us.
No, because the second part of my question, you said that the operational costs increased from 8 to 18. Is that per year?
No, that was the 30 year, across 8 to 18 million total OPEX over
Over
the
30 year,
year
I would have
period.
thought
Yep.
so.
Yep.
No, okay, right, yeah.
And
Councillor
then
Greenslade.
presumably, of course, the intended consequence is the reduction in the wastewater costs as well too. Or is there a reduction in that, or what it costs is what it costs?
No. Look, I think, and it's quite hard to quantify. There definitely would be, like shorter showers, those sorts of things. Obviously, that water goes to your to the wastewater plant, but yeah. And there's so many aspects of the kind of whole life costing that you can look at and estimate. At the moment, that's not included in these figures, and so yeah, I think overall the program has multiple benefits.
One thing one of the benefits you probably didn't highlight there is the lack of the lack of losses. Once you put a meter in, people realise they're losing water, and I think the national average is still around that 26%. Wellington's 45%. So every litre you create of expensive drinking water, they're losing half of it. So that's one of the big benefits here in water metering.
The only thing I would be concerned about would be people turning off their water and not accessing water because they're being charged for it, whereas at present that doesn't happen. So there's a flat charge on rates at present. The property owner pays that charge, and we don't want the stories that we do currently here with electricity across the district where people turn off their power and they don't use it. So I think it's something we have to consider in our district. It is an issue for us, and we're gonna keep that in mind.
Just to add to that point for the chair, I mean, certainly there are other mechanisms that you can use for those who face those hardships, and that's certainly a bit of work that's got to be done. You've got restrictors that you can put on, so there's a minimum flow, and I've had experience with that elsewhere. And I think, just to reiterate some of Tom's points, we don't have to start from scratch here. There's many councils who have already been down this route, and obviously we want to be able to pick what suits our communities the best. And for want of eating the same words I said earlier, I just wanted to also acknowledge the work that Tom does, and his passion, you can see, comes through. The work that he's done since he's been here, particularly with the rollout of the membrane plants, managing our renewals programs, and creating more headaches for Nicola. But certainly, we're not short of an incredible team in the water services. Again, just to thank Tom for his presentation, and also, again, another insight into the water services team, which we want to keep doing. And I know Sarah is working hard on that with bringing different aspects of our activity in front of you. So, hey, there's more to come in this space. Look forward to it.
Excellent, thank you. Hey, thank you, Tom. Great report. I think we could listen to you for another hour on water, but in lieu of time, we won't. We'll expect this presentation. Well, perhaps I could. Perhaps I'm. So I'd like a mover to receive that report. Move Rachel, seconded Councillor Foreman. All those in favour? Okay, it's carried. And again, thank you. Keep up the good work. And the last item on the agenda is the performance report. So welcome, Joe.
Kia ora koutou. Hope you've been enjoying these informative sessions from our great team. So just with the performance report, take it as read, but just to kind of highlight a few things. We've updated the work plan for you, and just kind of reiterating this is not an accident, this kind of education piece that we're doing with you, so just kind of helping you understand everything the teams are doing and the big pieces of work we're coming up, so that in a few months when we start coming with the water services strategy, that you'll hopefully have a good grounding of information. We submitted the first report to DAA on our water services delivery plan implementation, and we're tracking pretty well for the financial separation effective 1st of July. So that is on track. We took your recommendation on the asset management policy, thank you, back to council, and they adopted that policy at the April meeting. So there was a few changes that we made, so we just included the track changes version just so you could follow. And we've recently just done the update on the non-financial performance measures. So those are sort of updated as of March, I think it was. So just so you've got those latest copies. Just some feedback that we took from the chair. We've just kind of made it clearer which things have already been to council and which things are new. So hopefully that helps you as you're reading through the report, and just pointing out which risks have changed. So just to make that also easier to read. And we've just included that infographic thing just to give you a bit of a snapshot of current state. So if there's any questions, happy to take them or direct them to Sarah. But yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Joe, I emailed you. What's the story at the Motocherry camping ground? What's happening there? Sorry?
So in terms of, they're still looking at...
I just wonder, is it tied to the lease though? That was really the question. Is our water situation tied to the lease? Because you said you were working with the camping ground. And I went through the Motocherry Reserve Management plan.
I think it's, I've got some info. It is under the, can't find my email.
Yes, so we're working through, because Motocherry doesn't meet the drinking water standards, so we're working through what our options are there, and I think Tom had covered off a little bit of that at our previous meeting. So we're working with Te Mata Arawai on that in terms of what our options are to meet arsenic. And then we have our property and facilities team who look after the lease for Motocherry, and we're working with them on that in terms of, you know, what those options are to ensure that we have a compliant water supply for Motocherry. And Tom has been working on those solutions in terms of, you know, getting to a compliance standard at that site. So making some really good inroads there.
There was another question I had, and it's on page 33 that we've got, and you're talking about the flood Waitaka. I'm trying to see where it is, where I've got it. Are you talking about, I know it's a very specific question, but the reason I'm asking is that at the last co-governance committee, we had somebody in the public forum talking about the flooding that was going on around Korohi and around the marae there, and I wondered if that was what was being dealt with at present.
Yes, so I've just been looking back at the previous long-term plan to see what the business case drivers were for that. So we're just working that through at the moment to get some additional detail on that.
Yeah, I will ask. I'm just trying to find the page number. Page 21. It says there's an issue there around the systems possibly not being ready.
So our main financial system is CIA Tech 1, and so we're definitely well on track with that for the transactional information. Our IBIS budgeting system is just a little bit late, but we're still able to, if that's not perfect for 1st of July, it's not so critical because it's not the transactional stuff, so we can kind of correct to make sure the budgets are lined up a little bit after the fact. So we'll still be budgeting for the new annual plan because we've already, that work is mostly decided, but just getting it in the system may be a few tweaks. So
no
it's
real
not a high risk.
consequences.
It's not.
There,
Yeah,
it's just a bit of paperwork.
It's a bit
after.
frustrating because it's causing a little bit of stress to staff, but it's not going to have a huge impact on our progression. It's not going to trip us up later.
Okay, because that probably then flags the other issue that I saw here about staff capacity. So that.
Yeah, that's an ongoing risk that we're managing, and that's why we've kind of got the program group looking after everything, and not least because of all the stuff that we're still not clear on with the overall council LTP stuff. So yeah, we're just continuing to monitor that.
Cool. Any other questions? There's nothing else in that register that I saw that you haven't covered off on. So yeah, good report. So if there's no other questions, there's a resolution that we'll put to that we receive the water report, the service committee performance report. Someone like to move that? Move Councillor Greenslade, second Councillor Foreman. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. So before we close, we'll close with the karakia, but just thanks for your attendance. Thanks for some fantastic presentations again to the presenters. That was great to get in depth. Presentations like that gives us all the information we need to help guide the decision making. So thank you very much for that. It's been excellent. So we'll close the meeting with the closing karakia.